I am. I have my
Okay.
audio. Oh, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Yes. Um, Sorry, I was using a different mic and then freaked out, so I didn't know what to do, and then I was just like, oh, I'll just resort to computer audio. But yeah,
I hate when that happens.
I know, right? Well, thank you so much, Phideaux Xavier or Phideaux Xavier, however you want to pronounce it, for your time. I am so honored to be able to speak with you. I mean, I am a huge fan of all your work, all your different musical um, the all the different albums that you've done, because you have a lot of albums, but all of them are very different from each other. I mean, I would say you've definitely gone through an evolution of sorts with starting off kind of psychedelic rock folky and then kind of going more into progressive avenues. But yeah, I have to say, you a couple years ago, I think like in 2018, you did an interview with Notes Reviews, Michael, and he was actually the person who got me into you.
Oh, I owe him.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. He was because I've been, and it's funny actually because I'm having a Zoom interview with him as well later this week. So because I had to be able to talk with him because he's got me into all sorts of different prog artists. But
Well,
he
give him my regards.
yes, definitely. But it was the album that the first album that he recommended, that I saw a video of him do for you, was Doomsday Afternoon. That was the review that he did that I saw and was immediately I, I immediately was interested in it just based on what he was how he was describing it. You know the it was, I mean, he labeled it as a masterpiece, which is like the ultimate rating, and I was just like, okay, this is interesting. And it was actually one of the first albums I got that wasn't like 70s prog. It was one of the more recent ones. I mean, that was like 2007. So I guess now it's it's still maybe a little while ago, but still, compared to what I was listening to, it was much more recent. And
Yeah.
I was totally blown away by it, absolutely blown away. And it's funny because um, my dad, who also kind of got me into prog a lot, I showed him this album, and he was totally blown away by it as well. I mean, just as much as I was. And
Ah,
it's a brilliant album. It's I'll talk more about it later and ask more questions about it later. But it is such a unique album, and it's very kind of obviously you. I don't want to get too much into the questions I'll ask later, but it's just a brilliant album, and I think I'm just
thank
gonna
you.
yeah, absolutely. And I just want to go through maybe chronologically through your discography a little bit and ask questions about it. Maybe I'll start with some general questions, but uh, sorry, it's just loading. Okay. Well, I'm just going to start off really basic. What are your like main like primary musical influences?
Well, I grew up with an older sister, and she had albums in the house. And obviously, for me, the generation I grew up in, the first music I really gravitated to was the Beatles.
Yeah.
She had their psychedelic albums, Magical Mystery Tour, and the White Album, which isn't psychedelic, but I I really got absorbed into Magical Mystery Tour because of all of the production. It was very kid friendly because there was all this weird stuff in it. And I remember one day I was I think 6 years old, and there was a song playing, and she was playing a song, and it was one of those things where I heard this music and I thought, I'll never be able to live life unless I find out what this is and I can listen to it again. And I think when you're 6 years old, you don't necessarily feel that way about music. So it turned out to be a song by the Jefferson Airplane called Lather, written and sung by Grace Slick. And so that began my love of music. And from there, it was all the typical 60s, 70s, like 69 era stuff, Beatles, Rolling Stones, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. which were a huge influence because of the studio, their use of his use of the studio to make sounds that couldn't be made normally. And then she introduced me to King Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I think one of the first band that I liked, the first favorite band after the Beatles was Jethro Tull, and it was the album Thick as a Brick, which my album Snow Torch is sort of my homage to Thick as a Brick or Passion Play. And then after that, it was Yes. And from there, that was the middle of the 1970s. And so that style of music was proliferating everywhere. And I had to find out everything I could about it. And then, of course, when I went to college in the middle of the 80s, that was the era of kind of post-rock, The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, and I really loved a lot of that slightly goth tinged music, which I felt was, and there were a lot of people, for instance, the band Wire, the band Magazine, they would take elements of kind of punk rock and progressive rock and merge it into this dark music. Susie and the Banshees is a great example of that. And so today, the music that I think of as my greatest, the things that I look back to most are probably Yes and the psychedelic music. Recently, I discovered a band, The Kinks, which I had never listened to when I was a kid. And they have this period in the middle where they're doing very theatrical music. And they have this 3-album or 2-album, but 3-disc set called Preservation Act. And that's currently my favorite thing to listen to. So.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. I was, I mean, I think most people know you as like a kind of a progressive rock artist and with elements of psychedelic and folk. But I was listening to like Ghost Stories today, Ghost Story, and it has I almost think it has elements of like glam almost. I don't know. I hear like a little bit of like possibly some Roxy music. I don't know. That's just something that I thought. Or like I think it's one of the last.
I should have mentioned Roxy Music. They are huge influences.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, they're absolutely fantastic. And I but yeah, it's just something interesting. It's something that I thought of. And I think there are definitely indications of, where you would go in the future with some of your earlier albums. But what was like the point in time, or what made you go from writing psychedelic folk rock to progressive rock? I think it was mainly maybe like Chupacabras, where it kind of, there was a shift happening a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, what happened was I'm a self-taught musician. I've never played well with other musicians in the sense that I couldn't really jam. I went to music camp once, and all the other guys there were jamming on Close to the Edge, and they were playing, all of the, they were so technically great. And all I wanted to do was write songs and sing like Peter Gabriel. And there wasn't really a place for me. It felt like in a lot of the bands that I was growing up with. So I kind of gravitated to garage rock and punk rock and stuff that was more, easy to play. But then my solution to making music was to record myself and to buy equipment and to try to make my own music with just me. But the problem is I'm not a very technical minded person. So I never could quite achieve what I wanted to achieve. And I made one album, which is unofficially, it's not really part of my official discography, called Friction. And that was like a bunch of, hodgepodge of every kind of music. It had sort of electronic sequencer stuff and stuff that I had cellists and it was a grandiose project, kind of based on the 22 tarot cards. And it was a very ambitious thing which I think had some good songs. And it was just like, let me dump out everything I possibly can. And that did not turn out well because I didn't like, it wasn't recorded well. So then I regrouped and I met a drummer and I started working on music that was more performance oriented. And he and I wrote and created Ghost Story. And that's my drummer, Bloody Rich. And that I made between 96 and 97. And then I mixed it and it still didn't turn out good. And I abandoned music for several years. And it wasn't until 2001 when I was doing volunteer work in New York City after the World Trade Center towers collapsed. And I was feeling like, maybe I need to just give up any hope of making music. And so I thought, because I've never really done it to my satisfaction, and if I have this dream that I don't realize, it's just going to grow like a tumor on me, and it'll poison me. So I have to get rid of it, kill it dead. Thank you. I made some music. It didn't really work out. That's all good. And so I was coming back from New York City and I thought, well, since I never have to worry about making it or trying to compete in the music industry, why don't I just hire a producer and make an album that I just want to make? And so after that airplane, I decided to get a piano, rent a piano, because I had always wanted to learn how to play piano. And so I brought this piano into my house. I had given up music, but I still wanted to record something. And I started writing a little bit on the piano. And this was around the time that I discovered Dream Theater, and a bunch of the Marillion bands that I never knew had been making progressive rock after the era. Like I went right into Susie and the Banshees and The Cure and never listened to anything that might be considered progressive rock. So I started rediscovering all this progressive rock. And I discovered a bunch of Italian bands. There was a band called Locanda della Fate or Della Fate, I don't know how to pronounce it. And they had all this gorgeous piano music. It's an incredible album. So I started thinking, well, I'd like to write something like this on the piano. Now, I had never really played the piano before. So I started putting together Chupacabra, which was kind of based on maybe a little bit of IQ, the music of IQ, and the music of Locanda. And it was, so that's how the shift came about. Now, Chupacabra was supposed to be on my first album after Ghost Story and Friction. And the first album was called Fiendish. And when I had a problem with Fiendish because I had a producer who ended up, I didn't really see eye to eye. I'd hired him. He didn't really mix the album to the degree that I was pleased with it. I felt like I was looking at my third failure. And so I regrouped, found another guy to mix it, had my engineer Gabe Moffat sort of do some mixing on it as well. But once we finished that, I realized that Chupacabra hadn't really been properly recorded and it wouldn't fit on my album because it would take over the whole album. So I decided to hold Chupacabra back, make Fiendish its own identity. And the song that I really like on Fiendish is the song Vultures and Mosquitoes. And that's the song that was the reason I still wanted to record, because after Ghost Story, I had written Vultures and Mosquitoes and I had never recorded it. I was like, well, at the very least, if I'm never going to make music again, let me at least record Vultures and Mosquitoes. And so I then, once I mixed Fiendish successfully, I thought, well, the Ghost Story wasn't so bad. Let me have Gabe remix that. So I then brought Ghost Story into the new world of my newest music, and that became my official second album, even though it was recorded way before the first album. And then the third album, Chupacabra, was comprised of songs from Ghost Story that didn't fit on Ghost Story for time and for texture, the whole ruffian on the stairs thing, and Chupacabra, and they became my kind of bits and pieces album.
Yeah, you mentioned Friction, and I've read reviews on it. I've seen a lot of people. I've heard a lot of things about it. I don't know where to find it. I can't find it on your Bandcamp or on iTunes. Yeah.
I'll be happy to send you a copy. You
Oh,
can
really? Oh my
have,
gosh. Thank you. Thank
yeah,
you.
you can tell me after this is over, and I'll send one to you.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, that would be amazing. Yeah, because that would actually complete my everything that I've heard. But
Don't get your hopes up.
I even, no matter what, if it's Fideaux, I'm gonna listen to it. I'm a completionist. I have to hear everything. But yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it's always nice to have that one song where you're like, this has to be, and Vultures and Mosquitoes. I mean, that's a great song, and I just, it's really cool that you found something that made you want to continue, and eventually it actually, it really worked out really well. And I have to ask this question. Many of your song titles consist of two words combined to form one like new word, like compound words. Examples of this would be Alpha Fiendish, Sound Blast, Metro Deathfire, Snow Torch. I love that. I love how that's like a recurring kind of theme with a lot of your albums, not necessarily musically or lyrically, but just in terms of the title. But and Snow Torch makes sense because it's kind of like, it's like oxymoronic in a way. It's kind of, but how do you come up with such strange compound words and decide to use them as titles for songs?
That's a good question. I mean, Sound Blast is not that unusual a combination. I wouldn't have thought to put that in the same category, but you're correct. It is in the same category. I think what happened was when I was writing Doomsday Afternoon, the whole Micro Death Soft Star and the Microsoft Death Star combination kind of came into existence. And after that, Snow Torch was a bit of a joke, but it fit for the album. And but the funny thing, my favorite story of all is the story, and you can understand with Microsoft Death Star being a play on a big company making a Death Star, but so then the Micro Death Soft Star became the counterpoint to it. So it's like this, small, deadly, soft star that will kill you without you knowing that you're even going to die. And that I think inspired the idea of, juxtaposing words. Plus song titles, you have, how many people have written the song Somebody to Love? How many people write the song Yesterday? I mean, there's only so many, you write a song and they're like, let me Google if there's a song someone wrote. Oh, they've already wrote that. So I was actually on Facebook years ago when I was working on this album, Infernal, and I was looking for a song title, and I sort of wrote in a chat like, hey, I'm looking for a song title. And what was unusual was there happened to be a bunch of people who joined in this chat for about an hour, and they were from every continent except for Antarctica. And so throughout the course of this hour, I was describing what the song was and what it should be. And someone just suggested a compound title. And I realized, and that caused me to come up with the idea of Metro Deathfire. And that was like sort of an homage, obviously, to Microsoft, Micro Death or whatever. But it was really fun because I was having this conversation over the course of an hour with 20 people from all around the world helping me to figure out the song title. And I thought that was a really wonderful way to have a workshop with a bunch of people I don't even know.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it makes sense also with Microsoft Death Star and Micro Death Soft Star in the sense that in the context of the album, because they both represent different themes and then they come together in one way or another. So it made sense with that. I just think like, it's with the other song titles, how it's a kind of something that is a pattern in your music. But I think it's really interesting and really cool.
I think it continues into the future as well.
Definitely. Oh yeah, totally. I'm very much looking forward to that. Yeah. since you are a multi-instrumentalist, what is your, I mean, you mentioned that you learned piano pretty like around like early 2000s probably. But what is like your primary instrument for composing?
Well, when I grew up, I took folk guitar lessons when I was young, and I, never had an electric guitar till I was in high school. So I never really developed a lead guitar methodology. I was all about chords. My guitar teacher was really into the band Renaissance, and I liked the Moody Blues, so she taught me a lot of Moody Blues and Renaissance and Jethro Tull. Um, I'm not the greatest person who practices. As soon as I, as soon as I got a guitar and could play some chords and could understand that you could move the chords up the neck to make different beautiful open sounding chords, I started trying to write music. So whereas many people played guitar and they learned how to like finger pick and do all that kind of stuff, I instead sort of was like, oh, guitar, this will be my tool to write music. So I went the route of composing, not the route of performing per se. So I write songs often on the guitar, nowadays mostly on the piano, and there was a period of time where I would write songs on bass guitar. I was playing bass in a band for a while, and I would come up with some riffs on the bass, and it's different. And now I write songs also by just singing into my phone. I'll just sing into the voice. What do you call it? The voice recorder.
Yeah.
And so, but it's wonderful how a different type of song emerges if I go to the guitar, or if I'm playing I can write a different kind of song on electric guitar than I can on acoustic guitar. Or if I have an electronic keyboard that has an organ, could produce a different kind of a song.
Definitely. And I think I just asked that because I know like the early stuff, it's very folky, it's kind of has more guitar elements, it's more guitar led, but like you listen to an album like Snow Torch, right? Especially the first part, and it's very, very piano driven. And I think more so the first part than the second part. I think the second part is more like kind of chordal guitar stuff. But still, it's just something that I've always been interested in because I myself am a guitar player and I write, so it's kind of like I don't know as much in terms of piano how really to compose with that, but it's so cool that you can just kind of go
Well, it's
any way you want. Yeah.
it's like a right brain, left brain thing, like if you write with one hand versus the other one, different things could come out. I mean, I recommend trying to write some stuff on piano and keyboard, even if you have a limited capacity, or try to write a song on playing bass guitar. It's different things come out and it challenges you. I mean, the funny thing is what happened, I think, with Snow Torch as well as Doomsday Afternoon is I wrote many, many pieces on piano, and then you look at an album and you're like, oh, this is all piano all the time. So then you have to struggle to write a bunch of stuff with guitar so that you have a balanced sound, pretty much. And I think when I came back from working on when I had given up music and came back to music, I decided that I didn't want to be bogged down with any technology. So I was going to try to write on an acoustic guitar, write on an acoustic piano, hire a cello player, hire an oboe player, maybe have a keyboard player, but really not focus on anything aside from acoustic instruments and scoring. So that it took me a while to get more, and now I'm more into using a different variety of things in my current music.
Yeah, definitely. And I've always wondered this just based on what you just said, because in case anybody who's watching this doesn't know, you're a daytime television director and you do that as like your day job. But has that helped you in terms of arranging musically? Has it made you think more in terms of how things fit together and how you can? It's like how things are like pieces of a jigsaw and how they come together. I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, certainly, certainly working in television production is about fitting pieces together. I think it's really the opposite. I think that my ability to think musically helps my ability to work with actors and to think of the rhythm of scenes. And I know it all comes down to psychology when working in television production, because it's all about the psychology of the scene, the psychology of the crew, the psychology of the actor, my psychology. But in terms of music, working in television production has definitely influenced how I approach my music sessions, because I'm very much a taskmaster in the sense that we don't go in the studio and just sort of not know what we're going to do. I mean, there have definitely been times when I've gone in the studio. For instance, the fourth album, 313, was an exercise of going into the studio without knowing anything that we were going to do. But generally, there's an attack plan, a battle plan, and I'll have everything that I want to record and more. I mean, there's always extra music that gets recorded that, it hasn't been on an album yet. There's all these various to be determined projects that will be coming out in the next 4 years.
Yeah, that's very exciting. That answers some of my other questions, if there's anything coming out in the future, because I know, in the past couple
unfortunately,
years. Oh, sorry.
A lot. Unfortunately, quite a lot is coming out in the future.
Oh my God.
I mean, in the sense that I wish it had come out prior to this, but things take the time they take.
Yeah, because it's been kind of interesting for Phideaux fans, because obviously you put out Infernal in 2018, and then the pandemic happened, and then you released Lysogenic Burnt Offerings, which is kind of like demos, and you released that one TV version of You Do What You Will, and then you put out that album that you worked on, first recorded in like the 80s when you were like in high school. What is it? Oh my gosh, I forgot what the title is.
What is the title? Oh, All Is Number.
All Is Number. Yes.
I'm sorry that I wasted that title on that album. It's a great title, and it's a beautiful album cover. I love that album cover. I think it's worth having that for the album cover alone. I will admit I've never actually heard that album. I mean, I haven't heard it all the way through.
that is well, I mean, it's a long album.
What happened with that album was I had been trying to get all my archives together, and there was this one piece of tape that was like something I had done with all glissando guitars in 1980 when I was very young, and I was trying to get a copy of it, and I got all these cassettes from my sister. She sent them to me, and I had them transferred, and I found this piece of music that was done in a similar way, but it wasn't the exact piece that I wanted. And it was a 10-minute long piece of music. So there's a way in Pro Tools that you can stretch something out. You can stretch a 10-minute piece of music into 60 minutes, and that basically disintegrates the sound waves. So I was doing all these experiments with this particular piece of tape, stretching it out, using different pitch shifting to shift the pitch, crossfading stuff, making bits of it backwards. And I had created these sessions for each of the songs where I was trying to do a different thing with this, because I liked the vibe of the music. But the problem is, when you do it, you have to bounce it in real time. So the song that was 65 minutes, I was bouncing in real time, and I had never heard it all the way through, because I had set up all the crossfades and all the things that I wanted it to accomplish. And I had checked all the transitions, but I was about to sit down to listen to the whole thing all the way through as it bounced, when someone arrived at my door, and I had to have a conversation with this person for an hour and a half. So while I was talking to him, I was bouncing these pieces of music in preparation for releasing it the next day onto Bandcamp, and also sending it off to be pressed. So I ended up never listening to it, and I thought, well, maybe there's something good about releasing. I mean, I'm so anal about my albums and having to know every split second of them, that I thought there was something kind of good about releasing an album that I hadn't actually really heard. So to this day, I've heard some of it, but I haven't heard all of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really funny, that just the the process behind, because I had no idea how that album, how you went about recording or like putting that album together. It just you know, I mean, ambient music is such a unique kind of genre. I mean, I'm a big fan of like Brian Eno and all that stuff, but you know, and it kind of
Yeah,
has,
I mean,
yeah, it has that element to it, you know.
it
But
was definitely coming from that spirit, and it was very fun to put together. And I like it, and there have been times when I've listened to parts of it and enjoyed it. I mean, it's frightening. It's not an easy album to listen to.
oh,
It was also partly like Lou Reed's album Metal Machine Music, which
oh
is something worth checking out if you ever have a chance. Just listen to about 10 minutes of it, and it's an album that I really like, but it's really not fun to listen to at all.
yeah. Or like, what's that one? There's like a Scott Walker album. That's kind of like
Oh,
similar to it. I don't know. It's kind of very
right.
experimental. I forgot what it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, it kind of reminded me of
I know about that one, but I have not heard that one either.
yeah, it's similar to the Lou Reed stuff. But yeah, that's really interesting. Uh, would you ever consider working with an orchestra again, like you did on Doomsday Afternoon?
I definitely would. I am working with a violinist who does scoring, and she stacks lots of cellos and violins. I also am a huge fan of the new Yes album, and the new Yes album, and the one before this one as well. They've been using this orchestra out of an Eastern European country. And I was thinking the other day, like, it'd be really interesting to try to do something like that again. I would probably want. I've been wanting to do like an instrumental, a fully instrumental album along the lines of kind of maybe like a Mike Oldfield piece, and so that would be probably more likely where I would use it. Although I would say my newest album, which will be the next thing that I put out, is has some orchestration. It's probably more, oddly enough, along the lines of maybe early David Bowie, Elton John,
Uh,
kind of like that early 70s hunky dory, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road type of a approach to songwriting. A little darker maybe, but who knows.
that's really
And
interesting.
and there's one 14-minute long, very progressive rock type song on it, so people don't have to be too worried.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's always nice. I mean, it's strange when you have an audience who is, because I think, you probably have fans who are fans of your whole discography, but there's probably also fans who like the more progressive rock stuff. So you kind of have to please everyone in a way. But no matter what, I'm totally looking forward to that.
Well, I mean, yes, you do have to please everyone, but I mean, my current producer, Paul Russler, he is constantly joking with me that I must be planning to alienate my audience because a lot of the music that I'm doing isn't really progressive rock, and this particular song called The Legend of Mary Jo is a song that I actually started writing in the 90s, and I found it again during lockdown when I had sent a whole bunch of archives from New York City to Los Angeles because I had this other archival project I want to work on when I finish putting out my new stuff. But I had found this half-written piece of paper, and I had a session with Paul booked, and I had told him never let me write any new song because I have to finish and put out new stuff before I'm allowed to write anything new. And he threw his back out, and so a session was canceled. And so I had this piece of paper from the 90s with some ideas on it, and I started fleshing them out and trying to remember what they were. And by the end of 2 days, I had written this 14-minute song cycle thing that I became very excited about. And Paul gave me he said, well, okay, just this once, we can work on this song. And that became the sort of the centerpiece of this new album that I have coming, hopefully in the new year.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that is very exciting. That is absolutely very exciting. And yeah, now to talk about Infernal, typically when a long anticipated album is released, it's hard to meet the expectations of your fans. However, I think Infernal, in my opinion, is just as magnificent as Doomsday Afternoon. I absolutely love it. And I'm not sure what
Thank you.
the general public says about it, but I absolutely adore that album. Do you think that being under pressure stimulates creativity?
Well, maybe yes and no. I think what happened with Doomsday Afternoon was that I had written and recorded both Ghost Story and Great Leap and Doomsday simultaneously. But then I realized that it would be a lot easier to finish Great Leap, and that I wanted something a little higher, a higher purpose for Doomsday Afternoon. And so I put Great Leap out, and then I spent the next year doing the orchestration and working on Doomsday. And it was, clear to me that Doomsday was now that people responded to far more than they had my other stuff, and certainly a lot more than they had the Great Leap. And so when I finished Doomsday Afternoon, that's when I put together my band, because we were invited to go perform in France. And the band is comprised of a lot of friends that I knew growing up, and some other musicians that I admired and liked. And we went and performed. And after that performance, I knew that I wanted the next album to include that group of people. And so because I did not want that album to be considered the third part of the trilogy, I went out of my way to call it number 7 and not be associated with the album. So I think the sense of, was there pressure to match it? I sort of took away that pressure by specifically saying, well, I'm not finishing this thing. And then Snow Torch came about while finishing up number 7. And so then I started to really like Snow Torch, and was like, okay, once again, I'm not going to be doing this third part. So, and then we as a band performed more. Snow Torch was even more recorded as a band. There's even a song on Snow Torch called Love Theme. Actually, that's number 7. Sorry. So I guess Love Theme from number 7 was one of the first songs where, for like 8 minutes of that song, I don't even play on that song at all. It's like entirely other musicians that I'm just, producing, and they're adding all their contributions, and that was very exciting to me. So more of that happened on Snow Torch. But once I realized that I was ready to make the third part, I had written basically 2 things that were going to be the third part, and they were they were each 25-minute long songs, and one was a very piano-ish song, not unlike Snow Torch. In fact, it was written before Snow Torch, and so, but I didn't really. It felt, once Snow Torch was done, this piano thing felt too much more like Snow Torch versus Doomsday Afternoon. And I started to realize that what I had been doing with the live band, where we were performing music from Doomsday Afternoon with new ideas, that was more related to Doomsday. So I started taking some of the stuff that we as a band were doing and reinterpreting it into new songs. And then I also was aware, when making Infernal, that I was not just making the follow-up to Doomsday Afternoon, but I was making the follow-up to The Great Leap as well. So that's why the album is kind of half shorter songs and half longer things. And the second 25-minute song that I had written for Infernal is basically what is the third side of Infernal. And so if you were to take the song Cast Out in Cold, all of the third side, and then the second to last song, Eternal, that would have been the 25-minute side that would have been one song in a previous version.
I'm horrible with sides, but does the third side start with the Dissonance We Play, or I don't know which song.
It has that on it, yeah.
Oh, it has that on it. Okay, yeah.
It's the one that starts with sort of this piano thing, like dun 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 da 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 da.
Oh, Order of Protection. Okay, yeah. Yep. Okay, you're right. Yes. Yeah, and I'm thinking the Dissonance We Play because that's like kind of when it starts to crescendo within the album, and it starts to build, and you feel the tension and the the
Right,
anticipation.
and that's like the same lyrics sort of as the very first song on the album. It's, you know, the spider in its
Yeah.
web.
Yes. Right. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's more kind of heavy and more intense, and yeah, it's amazing. Uh, sorry. Okay. Sorry, we answered some of these questions already. How do you manage to successfully balance your primary job, like your day job, with your side job of composing music?
I don't. I don't. I don't successfully manage it. You know, it's very often I have to kind of quit my job in order, like I needed to quit my job for 6 months in order to finish Infernal. And while that was happening, well, I used to, you know, my former collaborator was Gabe Moffat. He was my producer. He's the one listed as a producer on all those albums. And he's an incredibly talented, first of all, he's an incredibly talented guitarist. He's an amazing producer and engineer. And he got a job around the time that I was trying to finish Infernal, working for Disney on cartoons. So he became unavailable to me on a regular basis. And so that kind of threw me for a loop for several months. For almost a year, I really wasn't working on anything. I went right back into working on my day job. And it wasn't until I met Paul Russler at Kitten Robot Studios here in Los Angeles. And I started working with him. And I was working with him pretty much just to finish vocals for Infernal. And then, but I started writing some new music and recording it with him. Then there was maybe a year where I would do some sessions with Gabe and then finish up some of the stuff with Paul. But then ultimately, you know, I migrated over to Paul. I also have done some work with a really talented engineer, producer named Rich Mauser, who's, you know, responsible for all the Spock's Beard
Mhm.
and Neil Morse stuff. He's mixing a live album for me right now of basically the Snow Torch tour, as it were. You know, so it's got a lot of Snow Torch era music on it, and that album I hope will come out early next year. Paul and I have been, well, just to give you an example of, and you may remember some of this from my interview with Notes, to give you an example of how I'm not able to manage my day job with my music career, is I have two Phideaux the band albums that are comprised of things that were never, that didn't fit on any of the other albums. There's one that is ostensibly called 7.5,
Yeah.
one that's I now call Informal, and Informal is bits and pieces of Infernal that never made it onto Infernal. So those are two 45-minute albums. Then I have three albums by my side project called Mogon, and those are pretty much finished. I mean, all these albums are like 92% finished. There might be one or two songs that are actually finished, and some of those have already been released, but there are songs that have not been fully finished. Then I've got my two live albums, one of which is, you know, one of which is like an album from 2012 or something after Snow Torch. Plus, we have we did record our recent Infernal show at Progstock, which was a performance we felt really good about. I would like to put that out. And then I have 5 albums that I've recorded with Paul, one of which is a double album to be called Wake. And then the newest album is called Automoto Animus. And then there are 2 albums prior to that that are, you know, maybe not, you know, not my favorite of the newest music. And that's one of the albums called Gristletoe, and the other one sort of has a bunch of different titles, but it might end up being called Faceless. So those are the 11, 12 albums that I hope to be finishing in the next 3 years.
Wow. I mean,
And I was hoping to get Automoto Animus out by the end of this year. It now looks like it won't really happen till January, February of next year, but I'm really hopeful. It's all about getting it mixed. So if there's any really great mixers out there who love mixing, high quality music, please give me a call.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that is incredible. Just how much music is just waiting to be.
But I feel bad because I feel like I'm a hoarder. I feel like I won't let it go until it's perfect, perfect, perfect. And that's kills a lot of the spontaneity. So I do hereby apologize to people, but it also, my job is very taxing, and there I'll go 3 or 4 months where I'm just in my work trying to earn the money, and then I'll work on the music. But so, I'm hopeful that I'll be able to get back to my music in a month or two. Right now, it's been a little taxing.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I totally understand that. I mean, it's there's so many other bands that I'm a fan of that, have day jobs and can't really sustain themselves just doing music, which is really unfortunate, I think. But no, at the same time, but yeah, that's just amazing to hear how much music is just about to be released, probably more next year. But yeah, I'm really much looking forward to that. You reached a level of success within Prague. Do you have any desire to move outside of Prague?
Well, I have a desire to make music that thinking people will enjoy. Like I think of my music as being emotional, thought provoking, in the sense that I like to write. I like to think about things as I write them. Um, I definitely like rock and roll, and I like to dance, and I like to snap my fingers, and I like catchy earworms of music. I don't think that I'm trying to find an audience anywhere. I think the progressive rock audience is a great audience because they generally like music that they have to hear a couple times. I'm not, I mean, I have loved Jethro Tull through all their iterations. I have, I love the new Yes album. I don't think it's, like I've been doing a lot of work lately where I've been listening to music a lot around the clock, and I'll hear the new Yes album, and then I'll hear all of Tales from Topographic Oceans again and again and again. And, the new Yes album is nothing like Tales from Topographic Oceans at all. But that doesn't mean that I don't love it. And that doesn't mean that the minute I hear that first song, which is written by the singer and the bass player, who have not really been in Yes a whole lot, and that song I still accept it. I love it. I think I can't remember the name of it. Dark Park, you
I haven't
know,
followed. Yeah, the new
Reach
album.
for the Stars or Look at the Stars or something. Or and it's a great, amazing song. So yeah, so I mean, I would say that the same audience that will accept Peter Gabriel moving on from Genesis, the same audience that would accept Peter Hamill moving on from Van der Graaf Generator, the same audience that would accept Bill Nelson moving away from Bebop Deluxe, would be the people that will, maybe understand that I'm trying to satisfy the muse as a musician, and that my goal is to bring forth something that I think has emotional value. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but my albums say that the songs were discovered by Phideaux Xavier. I
I,
don't write my credits that songs are written by Phideaux Xavier. That it always says discovered by, and that's because I do feel that I am given the songs from wherever. I'm entrusted with this music to bring it forth. So I kind of stopped thinking of it as being, something for my own ego. Obviously, I'm a very egotistical person, but I'm saying that I also enjoy feeling like, wow, this music came from a place that I can't explain. I mean, this whole 14-minute song on my new album called The Legend of Mary Jo, I found this piece of paper. I was like, yeah, whatever happened to this song? I sat down at the piano, things started coming out. I was like, wow, I'm going on a journey over the course of a day, 2 days. I wrote this thing out. I brought it to Paul. He was like, wow, this is pretty good. We got a drummer in, this drummer named Joe Berardi, who's played with a lot of really interesting, math rock and prog rock people, and he's played in with the grandmothers, the old mothers of invention. He's a Los Angeles drummer. He kicked this song to a place where I would not have thought possible. And then we asked a guitarist named Fernando Perdomo, who plays in a lot of progressive rock things. He's an incredible guitarist. I never ever do this. I never like to have someone just send me tracks because I always want to be there and participate. But he sent in these tracks, and at first I heard them and I was like, "This is awful. This is so wrong. It's not at all what I want." And then after I listened to it a little while, I was kind of thought, "No, this is actually what the song needs. This is better than what I ever would have thought of." He tapped into the same place. So I feel like in this particular case, the song wanted what the song wanted, and it was up to me to try to, liberate the statue from the marble, as it were.
Yeah, and that reminds me. I think it was Michael Jackson who said, when you're writing, you have to let God in the room, or something like that. You have to let some other force kind of take over, because it's an outer body experience when you're writing. I mean, I've written some things that I think I'm pretty proud of, and it's not something that I totally say is like 100% from me. It's like it comes to
Well,
you.
I mean, if you ask me right now to write a song, I would be able to. I'll send it back to you in an hour, but I'm not sure it would be a very good song because I know the songs that I write, and I know the songs that I write because something has been given to me, and I think they're very different. It's funny because Ghost Story was an example of I was very depressed after seeing a concert of a person who I kind of considered a rival in New York City at the time, and I really liked his presentation of music, and I was dissatisfied with what I was doing, and I was coming home from a gig, and I said, I was like, God, why can't I write music that's evocative and provocative and dynamic and this way and that way? And I was really down on myself. And I went home and I plugged my guitar in and a drum machine and a microphone, and I pressed record on the player. And I had and over the course of the next half hour, I just wrote the songs that would be Every Night, Ghost Forest, Universally, and Come Out Tonight. And I wrote them in 30 minutes, all four of those songs. Now, I didn't write the actual words. A lot of the words were gobbledygook, but I wrote the arrangement. I used the exact arrangement that I had spontaneously just vomited out as the arrangement on that album. And that was the first time that I thought, wow, something else came into this room and spoke to me. And then I listened to that tape for several months and kind of like tried to put those songs, tried to bring them into focus. And that was a very spooky experience because I had never been a really religious or psychic minded person prior to that. And that was an eye opening thing, which is maybe kind of why I called the album Ghost Story, because it felt like it was the stories of a ghost that was, guiding my hand.
Yeah, I mean, then again, not to talk about myself, but I've recently kind of turned a new leaf with religion and stuff like that, and it's the more I hear about things like that, right, with artists and music and the creative process, it just and it's really just incredible, honestly. But yeah.
Well, when I was a very young person, I really didn't have room for religion because I was exploring things. I was trying to expand myself, and I think as I've gotten older and have contemplated the purpose of life, the meaning of life, my place in the world, that's where spirituality and understanding of different, modalities of religion have come into focus, such that I now appreciate them in ways that I certainly wouldn't have when I was your age.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's totally understandable. But yeah, and I think earlier you mentioned Love Theme from Number Seven, I think, and I remember I actually watched it when it came out during the pandemic, the video for it, and it was like I don't know, you probably know who I want to shout them out. Whoever, uh,
Matthew Kennedy, who made it.
yeah, who made it? Yes, yes.
The bass player from the band Discipline, by the way.
Really? Oh my,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah, Matthew was the bass player in Discipline, and I had approached Matthew Parmenter to produce my album Fiendish, and I had become a fan of Discipline as I learned about new progressive rock, and I approached Matthew Parmenter, and he declined. He said he was not really interested in producing, but he was supportive of my endeavor, and so I think he played one of my albums to Matthew in the car at one, because I then would continue to send Matthew my albums, and he Matthew Parmenter, and then he played Matthew Kennedy some of my music, and for some reason I became friendly with Matthew Kennedy, and I thought, well, I should have him come out and play bass guitar on Doomsday Afternoon. That would be fun. So I invited him to Los Angeles, and he came and he got off the plane, and we sat down, and he had learned the whole album from beginning to end, and he played in his incredible Matthew Kennedy style, and we were like, oh well, now what do we do? I mean, he just knocked it out of the park. So then he became my live bass player for essentially the last 10 years. And there was a period of time where Discipline was on a hiatus, so it worked out very well for him that he had the time to perform with me when I was working on that 10-piece band concept, which I no longer am.
Yeah, I only recently started listening to Discipline, but probably their most critically acclaimed album, Unfolded Like Staircase, is just so great. But yeah, that's really cool to hear that. I didn't know
So he
that.
made that video. He also made the video of Chupacabra, the live version from France, which is when the first time we really performed.
Yeah, and that I mean, in terms of the love theme for number 7, I love just seeing some of the studio footage, some of the photos, and I love what is it, Johnny Unicorn, right? Who's like just wailing away, and it's just I mean,
and seeing Rich and Matt do their
yeah.
and and it's funny because Molly, the artist who did this album cover, and is the singer and percussionist in the band. She was the drummer in my punk rock band in high school. She happened to be at the studio because her husband Gabe was producing the session, and so she took a few little videos, which is the only video we have of that session was Johnny and there's a few bits of us in the studio. That's where I was essentially just acting as a producer, letting them play the music. I had written it, but Johnny was a far better piano player, so I made him do it on piano.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh. And even just like the the images of the crayfish and the dormouse and everything like that. It's just like, or the shrew, sorry, or yeah. It's just so great. I mean, it just makes me, it's kind of like almost like a battle happening, and it's like, but it's just epic. It's so cool, and it just it gets you excited, right? And
I mean, that's the closest thing, except for a little piece on Snow Torch, that I really ever have gotten to sort of, jazz fusion,
oh
There's
yeah,
just crazy stuff in that song that I mean, even though I set it in motion and they did, they added stuff, but it was, I mean, I knew what the song could be like. I didn't know it could be that good. I mean, in my humble opinion, based on everyone's contributions, but it was fascinating to just have a song where I could say, well, I didn't play on that.
yeah. And honestly, I mean, yeah, it is one of the more intricate pieces of music, I think, from Fido, but it's just so I mean, it's just such a great climactic piece, and then of course you have Storia Sente, and that comes right after, and it's just like the perfect switcheroo, like dichotomy between what came before, but it's absolutely gorgeous. And then yeah, just I think the video complements the music really well, and you know, Chupacabra's the live performance is amazing. And I think I saw in the description of the video there was like a what was it? There was a hailstorm or something like, or something. There was a storm of some sort that was
Yes,
happening.
a rainstorm was happening.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
had to stop the concert because the giant speakers were going so fast that they had to put them down on the ground. So we had to leave the stage for about 20 minutes. And the audience stayed out there in a monsoon. Basically, it was a mini monsoon on the coast of France. It was wild.
I mean that I mean it's such a great song, and to have something like that happen, and it makes it even more
I mean,
grandiose in a way.
you can see the rain in certain shots,
Yeah,
just and the water on the guitar, and
yeah. No, but oh my gosh, just you know, your kind of intro where you're like, okay, this is what the song's about, and then you have those like organ chords in the middle, like just that starts it off, and then you have the you know the gorgeous vocals, that gorgeous vocal melody. It's just it just gets you in that place, right? That kind of it's very uh I don't know, it just perfectly captures kind of the mood that you're trying to go for. But the Chupacabras is kind of mystical and kind of you know all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that is that's incredible. And I just wanted to ask for the I think this will be my last question, but I mentioned before I write music myself. Do you have any advice when it comes to writing music, specifically prog music? Even though I dabble in pop and folk and singer-songwriter and other stuff. But do you have any like just advice that you would give to somebody like me or anybody else who's in my position?
well, I would. I mean, the advice I would give someone for writing, there's different levels. You know, what the first level would be, just write anything, even if it's the worst song. Write 20 horrible songs, because then you can at least try to make them better. If you wait to write the perfect song, you may never find it. But if you write a lot of horrible songs, you can revise them, and there might be bits and pieces you can pick from later. The other advice I have is, you know, take your phone voice recorder and just sit down and noodle around and see what happens. And if something good starts to happen, just record it. You don't need to write it then. You know, I have hundreds and hundreds of recordings of ideas that I never end up, you know, getting around to finishing. But sometimes I'll be like, you know, let me listen to some of my ideas. I haven't listened for a while. And I'll be like, oh, this is a cool thing. I wonder, you know, I should work on this. I mean, you know, every time I also think just write what you want to hear. Um, maybe another thing is I'll write something and then I'll come back and I'll say, well, you know, what are some of the tricks that people do? Well, they modulate things. Or what are the different way, what different meter could I put this in? You know, it sounds great in 4/4. What's it like in 3/4? What happens if you put it in 7? You know, what like, you know, what I've written this thing, how can I sing against it? You know, I'm incapable of playing and singing at the same time because it would be too different. So there are times when I have to try to sing something without playing it at the same time. You know, I can't always write and sing at the same time. But I will tell you one interesting story that about writing something is I usually write my lyrics last. I'll start to sing something while I'm playing, and there may be a line or two that become the purpose of the song. Like I'll be like, oh, this seems to be about blah blah blah, but most of the words will just be, you know, sounds. Well, there was one day that I wrote down a bunch of lyrics, and I was like, oh, I'm going to write this down, and it's, you know, it was the force that gave us everything from hydrogen to love through the source of consciousness, see the purpose comes. I just wrote that down. The force that gave us everything from hydrogen to love through the something of consciousness, see the purpose comes, see the purpose comes. And I wrote it on a piece of paper, and I was like, well, this doesn't sound like anything I would ever be able to use. I like the sentiment, but there's no rhyme scheme, there's nothing. And then I was playing on the piano one day and I was playing bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum. And I'm like, well, what would I sing here? And I was like, oh, you know what? What are those words that I had written a week ago? And I brought them out and I was like, the force that gave us everything from hydrogen to love through the source of consciousness. See, the purpose comes. And I was so stunned that these two things fit together in a way that I never had thought that they would. And it really felt again like something had guided me to that. And, that song is probably the centerpiece or the thing that the album builds to. And of course, it was the last song written for the album, which Microdeath Soft Star was the last song written for Doomsday Afternoon, because I felt like, well, I have all these bits and pieces of music, but I don't have anything that ties it together, that sums it up. So that's when I wrote Microdeath Soft Star, which when we perform live, that's the one that people, that's essentially probably the favorite song of mine. If Doomsday Afternoon is the favorite album, Microdeath Soft Star is probably the favorite song. So Hydrogen to Love became essentially the signature piece on Infernal in the same way, because I was like, I need something that's really, you know, sort of ends this whole thing.
Yeah, and it was funny because Notes Reviews in his review of Infernal mentioned something that I thought was so cool, and it changed my perception of the album in a really cool way, in a really optimistic way, because the last song is titled Endgame, End, not The End, because it's a trilogy, right? So you think it's like the end, but just because it's the last installment of a trilogy, just because it's the third album of a trilogy, and also just the subject matter, it's very dystopian. It's kind of very cynical, but it's not the end. It's not like they're saying all his hope is lost, right? It's like there is still more to come, and I think that is such a just a little minor thing, a subtle, nuanced kind of little thing at the very end of the album that I happen to really like. And and yeah, you mentioned Microdeath Soft Star, which is incredible. Yeah. Then again, I mean, it's one of those songs where it's just, I mean, you have that violin melody, which is in like 7, I think, or I don't know what. It's in some odd time.
That violin melody, supplied, written, created by Matthew Parmenter, who put it over a part of the song that I was like, wait, I don't want that here. And it was, of course, it's the most important part of the song, So I owe that to Matthew Parmenter
Yeah,
a great deal.
yeah, it's so great. And I also have to mention, I would hate to not mention this while I'm talking to you, because Crumble is I love the first part. I think the second part is probably my favorite. The one of the most I don't want to drool over. I don't want to gush, but it's one of my favorite like piano ballads I think I've ever heard. It's just it's so beautiful. It's so heart wrenching. It's so kind of sentimental, but not in like a saccharine way, like in a beautiful way. And I really, that is just a favorite of mine. Microsoft Death Star, the first one, is also really great. But yeah, I mean the whole album.
I'm so glad you like that. It's ironic because originally the first Crumble was written to be part of that first side, which was all going to be just one long piece. And then I realized that there wasn't any particular thing that focused on Valerie on the album, and I really wanted something that could focus on Valerie. And somehow I thought, well, somehow the Crumble words started coming to me, singing over that thing, and I was like, maybe I could create another version of Crumble. And it's ironic because we have the instrumental Crumble, then we have essentially the piano and voice only Crumble, and then on Infernal I had this longer version of an a cappella crumble that we shortened for the album. And then we were going to do a really big band version of Crumble, which would have been, new lyrics, but it would have been just like really band playing Crumble. And we recorded it, and it ended up sounding like a Las Vegas, like a really bad Las Vegas thing. So I ended up removing it from the album, and instead of that, writing a song called Tumbleweed. So I would get the umble of Crumble, and I took the same idea and turned it into kind of a really more, you know, like a sort of darker, nasty folk type of a song. So there were, Crumble has had many lives.
Yeah, I mean, the Crumble on Infernal is the fact that it's a cappella is just haunting. It's just it's like so desolate. I mean, it's very dark and just beautiful. And I was going to mention something. I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, I also like how on Infernal, it's you don't just take themes from previous, like Doomsday Afternoon and The Great Leap. You also take themes. You glean like themes from number 7, like the Dormouse theme, right? You hear that in Sourdome, which is like just a cool little nod to that little song. And
Well, and if you notice on number 7, the song Darkness at Noon is basically Formaldehyde Part 2. So I mean, Frank Zappa once said that all his albums were just one album, and I kind of appreciate that because everything does interrelate in my work, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much for your time. I'm a huge Fido fan. I'm absolutely a huge fan, and as well as my dad is a big fan. So I try and introduce music to my family and also friends. But for the most part, it's kind of difficult. But your music is definitely something that has just resonated with me very, very deeply. And thank you, and I'm honored to be able to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time. Yes.
My pleasure. Thank you for your questions.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes. Bye.
Bye.